Business Council of Australia Chief Executive Bran joins us now. Bran, thanks so much. Good to see you last night and good to have you on this morning as well. I mean, you were not backward in coming forward last night. Do you think Anthony Albanese's listening? Because he said, essentially, thanks for the advice, but we're sticking with our IR changes. Did you expect any less?
Well, look, we always have a robust relationship with the Prime Minister. We put our views forward, he puts his views forward. I will say that his door's always open, that he always listens, which is very useful. But we do disagree on some key areas like industrial relations. And the reason why we take the view that we do is that the experience that I get from members and from businesses all around the country is that we aren't heading in the right direction in terms of our international competitiveness. We are losing investment opportunities. I was talking to a member recently that made the point that they've started looking incrementally, but very definitely at overseas opportunities because they just don't see Australia as being as competitive a destination in which to make investments and to do business.
We've heard leaders talk about the chilling effect of some of this populist rhetoric coming out of Canberra. We heard you and Jeff last night talk about the effects that we're seeing now. We're seeing, I think it was 1,200 businesses that had folded in July alone, and already evidence of some big businesses taking their investment offshore. What are those examples?
Well, the key thing, and I'd go back to those numbers, 1,200 businesses that have closed their doors in July alone, and think about the situation for the employees of those businesses. We're concerned about young Australians that are worried about their futures and their capacity to have a home, to own their own home, and thinking about what their future might look like in terms of jobs as well. Right across the board, we see that we are less competitive, as I pointed out a little bit earlier, and we are losing opportunities for investment as a consequence of that. Why is that important day to day? Well, what that means is that if we're not getting investment, we're not driving productivity. And if we're not driving productivity, then we're not in a position to produce real wages growth, which is what we all want to see. You know, at the moment, we are seeing wages tick up, and that is a good thing that people are getting paid more. But at the end of the day, those increases in the absence of productivity can be inflationary, and we want to move away from that. We want to get back to the point where Australians can get ahead in a real wages sense. And to do that, we've got to make sure we're as productive as possible.
Yeah, sure. But, I mean, we're now getting into an election cycle, Bran, and you know that things can often stall in terms of productivity on policy progress. But it seems that big business, for the first time in a long time, is particularly friendless in Canberra. You would expect a new Labor government, after 10 years of coalition rule, to be a little bit more on the other side of the ledger, pro-worker, etc., etc. The Greens, perhaps not surprising. But have you been surprised how the coalition have attacked big business?
What we want to do and what we'll continue to do is make the point that prosperity in Australia is fundamentally underpinned by the role that business plays. And you think about it, you've got 6 out of 7 jobs are in the private sector, 145 billion in taxes in 23-24. That's almost a quarter of all taxes that came in to the Commonwealth. And then, of course, there's the dividends that get paid, the support provided to superannuation funds as a consequence of businesses doing well, and the interaction between small businesses and large businesses. That's worth $700 billion to our economy. That's almost a third, or rather, it's almost 30% of our economy. So when you think about that, the role of business is critically important, and we are seeing challenging economic times. So our role is to make the case that we need the right kind of settings to support continued prosperity that comes about as a consequence of business doing well. As
a culture in Australia, and this goes to that question about, you know, businesses more and more looking to invest offshore. Something Jeff said last night, that, you know, success in this country is becoming taboo. It goes to that tall poppy syndrome in Australia that I think has always been there in the background. Is that becoming more pervasive and insidious?
Look, it's an interesting point. My wife's an American and I spend quite a bit of time in the States as a consequence of that. And one of the things that I notice over there is that they really do celebrate their successes a little bit more than we do. We've got businesses that are doing well, and those businesses, as I mentioned before, they support jobs, they support taxes, they support growth, and they fundamentally lock in our way of life. You know, numbers are sometimes a little bit abstract, but they're important. We've had long-run economic growth of about 3%, 3.2%. We've had long-run productivity gains of about 1.2%. Economic growth is now sitting at 1%. Productivity sitting at 0.5%. We need to lift up those figures if we're going to be able to lock in our quality of life. And to do that, we've got to back in the organisations that are going to make that happen. That's business.
I just want to quickly ask you about the EPBC Act, and also, you know, there was this threat that there was going to be a climate trigger in that Act. I know you thanked the PM last night for resisting that, but have you been given assurances that won't happen?
Well, I think the PM's made it very clear that there isn't going to be a climate trigger or climate considerations included in the EPB legislation. We think that's a really good thing. That's not to say that there are issues associated with our climate ambitions. To the contrary, we believe very firmly that Australia does need to be committed to net zero, but we've got a good trajectory for doing that in terms of the safeguard mechanism, the capacity investment scheme, and also the work that's being undertaken now with respect to 2035 targets. All of that work contributes to Australia being able to deliver on net zero by 2050, and that's a good thing. But our point right from the outset has been that we don't need to incorporate these new considerations into the EPBC. It's already a slow, cumbersome process. It's been described by those that deal with it every day, the lawyers, as and I quote here, the single greatest impediment to the green energy transition. That's simply because it's so slow and so difficult to deal with. Why would we include additional considerations in that type of process?
Bran, thanks so much for your time this morning. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.